Hey everyone, it's Jeremy Osterberger with Big Magazine. Today I'm joined by Brett Perlman, CEO for the Center of Houston's Future. In light of the increasing global shift towards decarbonization, Brett is here to talk to us about how the Houston area is well positioned to become a worldwide low carbon hydrogen hub. Thank you so much for joining us, Brett.
Jeremy, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So this year, there's been a lot of changes, Brett. Most super major oil companies have announced initiatives to reduce their carbon footprint, with hydrogen recognized as a key component in the energy transition. With that being said, officials in the city of Houston have been working hard to set the region up as the leader in the production of clean hydrogen for wide-scale energy use. So before we get too deep into that, though, Brett, could you give us just a little bit of an overview of the Center for Houston's Future, the history, and what are some of the initiatives you guys are taking on?
No, I'd be happy to. The center is a nonprofit that's been around for about 20 years. We spun off from the Greater Houston Partnership, which, as many people know, is the premier economic development organization in Houston. And our job is to work with the business community, with nonprofits, with government, with academic stakeholders to look at long-term trends and their impact on the Houston region. And I came here 4 years ago after a career both as a consultant and in public policy. I served on the Public Utility Commission in the early part of the 20s. And the reason I came to the center is because I saw the opportunity for Houston to become a leader in decarbonization, just as we became a leader in renewables after we went to competitive market. And so I was very interested in being part of that movement to help Houston become a leader in the global movement to decrease our carbon emissions.
Oh, thanks, Brett. Yeah, so can you tell us about this report that the center released and what indicators did it find about making Houston the good choice for the development of clean hydrogen industry versus maybe some other cities that are its peers?
Yeah. Well, so let me just give you a little bit of background on the energy work we've been doing. So as I mentioned, when I came here, we started looking at could Houston become a leader in the clean energy transition? And we published a report called the 4 Pathways Report, which is available on our website, which identified these 4 different ways in which Houston could take its existing position in oil and gas and become a leader in the trend towards decarbonization. And those 4 were carbon capture, hydrogen, what we call low carbon grid technology, so all kinds of things like batteries and distributed energy resources. And then finally, petrochemicals and creating a circular economy, the idea that we want to be able to more efficiently use plastics. So out of that, we saw the huge opportunity in hydrogen, and people probably aren't that aware of hydrogen as they maybe remember it from the periodic table. It's the lightest element, but don't really know how it's used today. As it turns out, it's a very versatile molecule. It can be used as a feedstock in petrochemical industry. It can be used as a fuel in vehicles. It's used, perhaps the application that people know most is it fueled the NASA space program to send men to Mars, and so to men to the moon. So hydrogen is a very versatile potential fuel for decarbonization. And so when we started looking at hydrogen, one of the things that we learned very quickly is that when you produce hydrogen out of natural gas, you produce a lot of CO2. And so we have to deal with how do we address the CO2 that's produced from existing sources of hydrogen. Well, as it turns out, you can capture and sequester that hydrogen, and the Texas Gulf Coast is a really great place to do that. So we have lots of pipeline infrastructure, we have salt caverns, we have just an amazing amount of industrial expertise and financial wherewithal. And so this idea of converting our existing hydrogen industry, which we produce about a third of the hydrogen in the nation along the Texas Gulf Coast, to be what people are now calling blue hydrogen, is one opportunity. But we also saw some other opportunities, as I mentioned in the early part of this century, around 1999 through 2003. I was on the Public Utility Commission, and as a result of electric restructuring, we saw this huge growth in renewable energy. And as it turns out, another way of making hydrogen is to split water, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen. And in order to do that, you need lots of energy. And if you want to do it in a low carbon way, that energy should be renewable. And so that's another path that we've been exploring here at the center. So the combination of the producing hydrogen and cleaning it up, moving from what people call gray hydrogen to blue hydrogen, which is using the natural gas chain, and then also moving towards these newer forms of creating hydrogen by splitting water into its component atoms, are the two main ways that people are thinking about hydrogen, and we are well positioned to do both. And then finally, we're just well positioned because we have lots of applications in which we could use that hydrogen. In addition to the petrochemical and refining industry, we could use it in trucks. We can use it to store energy off peak and then put it back on the grid on peak, which is, as we know, after February, there's a huge need for energy storage, so you can do this at scale. You can use it as a replacement for other sorts of fuel, whether it's coal or natural gas in industrial applications. And then finally, you can send it abroad. Europe and Asia are hungry for low carbon fuels, and the idea of exporting hydrogen is something that we've been talking to many companies about. So long story short, we started at a very high level asking where could Houston be successful in leading the world in the down the path of decarbonization. What we found some amazing opportunities.
Brett, great overview and covering the kind of full value chain there of hydrogen. I thought that was fantastic. So thank you for rolling through that. So not to be ominous, but I guess the next question is, talk about some of the challenges or obstacles that the center has found that will, need to be addressed in order to put Houston on the map as far as a global hydrogen hub.
Absolutely. So you mentioned global hydrogen hub. As it turns out, cities and regions across the world are positioning themselves for this new industry, and it's expected to grow by 10 times over the next 15 to 20 years. So this is really an amazing not only opportunity to work on addressing climate change, but also in creating a new industry. But there are challenges in doing that, and we have convened about 120 organizations to work with us on identifying what some of these challenges might be. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a large stakeholder meeting, and we put that exact question to the group. And we asked them, what do you see as the key gaps for Houston in becoming a clean hydrogen hub? And what they told us was the lack of a strong state policy framework was a clear gap in developing a hydrogen hub. Now, at the federal level, we have the infrastructure bill, and the infrastructure bill, which passed and President Biden signed almost a month ago, provides $8 billion, so quite a big incentive for developing these clean hydrogen hubs. And in the Build Back Better bill, there's also incentives for reducing the cost of producing green hydrogen, the hydrogen from splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. But what we don't have is a state level policy framework. And I think that will be a barrier for us moving forward on some of this, frankly. California has huge incentives, and right now they're attracting a lot of industrial growth and development because of those incentives. And so I think people recognize that the biggest thing that we lack right now is not the assets or the infrastructure or the knowledge to do this. It's really having the regulatory and policy incentives to start to grow this industry and to become a global leader.
Interesting, Brett. You say that, think of Houston, and oftentimes in the traditional model, the state of Texas would be maybe competing with Louisiana for some investments. Funny you mentioned California, right? So this whole world is a little bit different than maybe what the state's used to. So
Yeah, no, we're going to compete. Well, we're hoping to collaborate with our colleagues in Louisiana, because the infrastructure that I was talking about really goes all the way from Corpus
sure,
Christi to Baton Rouge. And so we really do think that thinking about this as not just as a state, but as the Gulf Coast makes a lot of sense.
yeah, it's got to be regional solutions for sure.
Exactly.
So, so Brett, you mentioned these about 120, stakeholders. Could you give us some indication of who those are? Those manufacturers, refineries, petrochemical plants. Just give us a little bit overview of who are those folks that are kind of part of these conversations.
Yeah, and so we've brought together really, I would say, the creme de la creme of Houston companies, academic institutions, governmental agencies, international players, and then professional service and finance organizations. And so we really have, I think, a really interesting group of organizations that are stakeholders that all want to be part of this discussion and help us craft the vision for what Houston might become in terms of a clean hydrogen hub. So let me just tell you, without naming names, of course, but we have super major energy companies, the largest in the world. We have services, pipelines, and storage companies. We have chemical companies, very large chemical companies. We have some of the utilities and power sector players. We have companies that are dedicated to producing fuel cells or electrolysis equipment. As I mentioned before, the green hydrogen, that's how you would create it. We have 6 universities that are working with us across the state, and we're seeing a high level of collaboration from those universities. Everyone from the University of Texas to the University of Houston to Rice and Lamar University and A&M and Prairie View are all interested in being part of the network that we're creating.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate that clarification. So I know this is kind of the initial phase, of this, I guess, project, but can you talk about, kind of where things are, what's been done, to date, and give us an idea of a timeline? I think people listening to this might say, well, what does this look like? Is that going to make any sense? I just kind of taking that point of view.
Sure.
That kind of makes sense to you. So.
Yeah, well, all this equipment exists today. So you could, and theoretically, this could happen relatively quickly. It's really an issue of how quickly can we deploy some of this infrastructure and start to build markets around this. So hydrogen buses exist in California. Hydrogen cars exist. Toyota produces one called the Miata. The Mirai in California that is commercially available there. What we lack is the infrastructure. We don't have the hydrogen fueling stations. We need to build those. But people are thinking about, hydrogen in aviation and ground airport support equipment, and shipping and barges and tugs, just anything that moves, you could fuel with hydrogen, as well as some of these industrial applications, which I mentioned before, like steel making and cement making. It's really a great replacement for a way to decarbonize those industries. So this will all take time, but I think there is a sense of urgency given the challenge we face with climate change. And so I think what you'll start to see over the next 2 to 3 years is you'll start to see first some planning. We have to do a little bit of planning to understand what this looks like. And then after that, we'll start to see deployments, first in pilot phases, but then in full deployments. And so I would expect in the next year or two, you'll start seeing hydrogen fueled buses, hydrogen fueled trucks coming to your local neighborhood. And that would be a good thing, because these types of cars and buses and trucks are zero emissions. And so right now in Houston, we have a big problem with ozone. We have a big problem with sulfur dioxide. So these technologies not only don't emit greenhouse gases, CO2 and others, they basically have no local, no criteria air pollutants don't create ozone. They don't release, particulates, all the things that that lead to pollution in our city. Not only will we get a benefit from addressing climate change, but we'll get a benefit in terms of local air pollution. So I would expect over the next 2 to 3 years, you'll start to see that. And then these other sectors that I mentioned may take some time. So certainly by the middle part of this decade, I think we should be well under the way towards this transition.
And Brett, on that downstream side of things, like manufacturing sites like refineries and petrochemical plants, is that, new assets they're going to have to go in to, capture and sequester this? You know what I'm saying? How much of that investment do you believe we'll see here?
Yeah, I think we'll see quite a bit.
Yeah.
As I was describing before, converting the existing way we produce hydrogen through natural gas, we'll need to sequester the carbon. And that is an industry into itself, as I mentioned before, the carbon capture industry, a huge opportunity for Houston in and of itself. But then the other parts of it, will have to be developed. The whole infrastructure. If you think about this, is no different than if we were in the 1920s and thinking about the moving towards automobiles. We have to deploy all that kind of infrastructure that you see. We need the fueling stations. We need the tanker trucks, the tube trucks to move the hydrogen around. We need pipelines. All of this infrastructure has to be developed and built. So it's really quite exciting because literally billions, if not trillions of dollars will be spent over the coming decade on developing what we hope will be a robust hydrogen economy in and around the Houston area.
No, I really appreciate that, Brett, for the update on sort of the timeline. So Brett, we covered some of our, primary partners. Mentioned finance, regulatory, engineering, procurement. You feel that all that's lined up. However, how much more work is in that area?
Well, there's a lot of work, actually. We're just at the very beginning stages of these. One of the things that's interesting about creating this hydrogen ecosystem is it really cuts across a bunch of vertical industry silos. And so companies in different parts of the value chain are all having to work together. So you have to have truck manufacturers working with fuel cell manufacturers, which are working with hydrogen producers, which are working with pipeline companies and working with people who build in the gas station. So all these organizations have to find ways to collaborate. So that's one of the exciting things. So we're at the very beginning stages of this process. We also need a vision for this. We want to make sure this is all done in an efficient and effective way, and that we uncover all the major opportunities. So creating that vision, creating these alliances, all is going to take work and time. So we're at the very beginning stages, and we at the Center for Houston Future are very interested in having companies or individuals who want to be part of this new industry join us. So, and I should say it's a new old industry because hydrogen has been used really for 80 years. Right. But this idea of creating a clean hydrogen industry is a new industry. And so those who want to be part of the excitement of helping us decarbonize the Houston region, fighting climate change globally, creating a new industry, this is a great opportunity to become part of something that should be very exciting.
And Brett, let's get into the numbers a little bit. Talk to our viewers about the potential economic impact of Houston becoming a top clean hydrogen producer.
Yeah, well, let me give you some stats from a study that McKinsey & Company did just a few months ago. And they look both at the upside and the downside. So the downside is if we don't change, this McKinsey study found that we could lose about 300,000 jobs if we just continue to do business as usual. And many of those job losses will be in communities of color and economically developed, disadvantaged regions. And that is just the beginning. Those job losses could increase to perhaps as high as 370,000 jobs over 20 years. And again, we're looking out to 2050 if we move towards a accelerated transition scenario. So on one hand, there's a huge risk here because the world is changing. So we need to change with it. If we do change with it, that same study found huge opportunities, both in the short and the long term. So the same McKinsey study found that a clean hydrogen industry could create 53,000 jobs by 2030 and up to over 100,000 jobs by 2050. And these numbers would even be higher if you consider the multiplier effects. In other words, these are high-paying jobs in industries that help create economic wealth and benefit, and that's called the multiplier effect. So the job growth from this could even be higher. So when we talk about these energy transition, we're really talking about how do we become relevant, continue to be relevant as a city, as an industry in this new world. And I think if we do this, the future is quite bright.
And Brett, you talk about perception, there's a lot of positive public perception in the, Houston area, really the entire Gulf Coast of oil and gas. Refining, petrochemical industries have been so entrenched in our communities here for quite a long time. So, I guess the obvious next question is, how do you think this will go in the way of public acceptance?
Well, I think once people understand the benefits that we get from it in terms of economic development and decarbonization, I think it'll go quite well. I think there's a misperception that, Houston is the enemy and not the champion for the energy transition. I think that's incredibly wrong and backward thinking. So we work every day. I get calls almost every day of a new company that wants to come to Houston to be part of what we're talking about. So it's quite exciting. And they understand that Houston, that is the energy capital of the world, and that we do have the skills and the assets to make this real. And so they really do see people from around the country, around the globe, are starting to want to be part of this. And so I think it really is a very positive story for us, embracing change, being part of change as the world changes and the city changes. I think is something that's going to benefit us as a city, a region, and as a country.
Yeah, Brett, there's no better region in the world with the brain trust we have here as far as energy over the past, 100 years or so. So, Brett, what about acceptance of people who work in Houston's industrial environments? So outside of the public, actually the folks that have been making it happen here for, generations.
Yeah, and the companies are very interested. So a lot of the companies are interested. They're individuals that we get approached by almost every day who want to transition into this. They really see the opportunity. There are developers who work in things like renewables, who see the opportunity to develop clean hydrogen programs. So I think you're starting to see the industry pivot in a major way towards wanting to be part of what they see as a huge tsunami coming towards us. The thing that I think we need to do is find ways to take those skills, and which are very valuable in terms of thinking about this industry, because a lot of the things that we do today would be valuable and as we start to think about creating a clean hydrogen industry and start to transition them.
Yeah.
And so that's the key, is how do we do that workforce transition to provide people with the skills and opportunities they need as they look towards these new industries. And I think there's lots of opportunities to do that.
Right, I would assume that's going to be pulling in everything from high schools and industrial programs, junior colleges, correct? All those stakeholders have to be a part of that vision.
Absolutely, and that's the work we're doing at the center, is to really create that big tent where all of these parties can be part of the discussion.
Well, Brett's real interesting. Let's wrap up our discussion today. I just want to say thank you so much for spending a little time with us.
Thanks, Jeremy. Enjoyed it.
And look, Brett, I know hydrogen is just one decarbonization aspect for the center. And I'd love to have you back on later, maybe talk carbon capture and storage, low carbon electricity grid, and even the circular plastics economy.
I'd be happy to.
Well, look, thank you so much, Brett. Again, we'll have you on again soon. Hey, for everyone watching, for more information on what's going on at the center, visit centerforhoustonsfuture.org. Hey, as always, we're most grateful for our audience. Please like and share this recording with colleagues. And for more industry news, videos, webinars, and podcasts, visit bicmagazine.com. Hey, remember, everybody, it's what we do together that counts.